Juliana, if you can take a quick picture.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes as people come in to the webinar today. And as you're coming in, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say hello, and we'll just get started in a minute or so. All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Ruti Levtov. I'm a senior associate at the Prevention Collaborative, and I'm really excited to welcome you today to our webinar on edutainment to prevent violence against women and against children. And thank you again for joining us. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Prevention Collaborative, we are a global network of practitioners, researchers, and activists, all working to better equip ourselves and others with the vision, knowledge, and skills necessary to end violence against women and their children. For us at the Collaborative, edutainment is part of our work on what we call underutilized strategies for prevention. So strategies that really have potential to strengthen violence prevention, or especially like edutainment, can do so at large scale. Edutainment is not new. It's not a new strategy, but with some notable exceptions, which you'll hear about today, it hasn't been widely used for violence prevention, though it is gaining more interest and more attention recently. So, to learn more, the Prevention Collaborative commissioned a review of evidence of edutainment programs that looked at violence, and you'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. And we're also very lucky to be joined today by some pioneering groups working on edutainment that are going to share some of their work today as well. We will at the end have some time for questions and for a question and answer period. And we do know that a lot of you on the webinar probably have experience with edutainment programs as well. And so we're keen to hear your reflections and experiences as well in the chat. Before I introduce our speakers, next slide, please. A few logistics. First of all, please, I see this is already happening, so please introduce yourself in the chat box. As I mentioned, we'll have a question and answer period at the end. Please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A function at any time. You should see a box that allows you to do that. This meeting or this webinar will be recorded and will be shared with everyone who's registered and will also be available on the Prevention Collaborative website. And finally, our speakers, given the topic, will be sharing some clips today, video clips. The video quality is very dependent on participants' internet connections or individuals' internet connections, but we will be sharing the links to these clips in the chat so you can watch them, in your own time if your connection is not great. Also, please keep in mind that in these clips, there's some images and sounds, images and sounds depicting violence. So please do take care and keep that in mind as you're listening. Next slide. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Amber Peterman, who was the author of the evidence review. Amber is a multi-country impact evaluation specialist at UNICEF's evaluation office based in Nairobi. Her work focuses on the intersection of gender and development with an emphasis on violence against women and children, social protection, and adolescent well-being. She's a quantitative researcher and has collected large-scale data in many countries, and is very, very well published. And we'll share the link to the review article momentarily. Amber holds a PhD in public policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she previously worked as a research associate professor. Next, we're really honored to have with us Phinah Kodisang, who's the CEO of the Seoul City Institute for Social Justice, who's really been a pioneer in this work on edutainment and even specifically edutainment related to violence. Seoul City is a renowned South African organization championing gender equality, sexual and reproductive health, and social justice. With over 20 years of leadership experience, Phinah has been instrumental in driving transformative programs addressing systemic inequalities and advocating for the rights of women and girls. Under her leadership, Seoul City has expanded its impact through innovative campaigns and community engagement initiatives. And we're, again, really excited to hear more about that. And finally, we have Alexandre Rideau, who is one of the founding members of the NGO RAES in Dakar. It was founded in 2005, where for 10 years he has experimented with new approaches to digital media and communication for social change across Africa. He has produced some iconic African shows like C'est la Vie, Sako and Mangane, Wara, and several others. And since 2021, with Media One Africa, Alexandre has produced films, documentaries, and series in South Africa, in Benin, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mauritius, and Ivory Coast. And the content of these is often used as backbone for edutainment programs on the continent, giving voice to African storytellers and artists, and shedding light on pressing social issues of our time. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Amber to talk about the evidence around edutainment and violence. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thanks so much, Ruti. And welcome everyone again. It's great to see so much knowledge actually on edutainment in the virtual Zoom room. So I'm going to take you through in the next 15 minutes or so about what the evidence says on this topic. And I should mention that this was a review that I did pre-UNICEF, so on behalf of the Prevention Collaborative. So next slide, please. So just to cue up sort of what this whole webinar is about, obviously we might come with our own idea of what edutainment is, but I guess, you know, we're not going to go a lot into sort of what violence is and the prevalence of violence. We're going to assume that most of the folks on this call are pretty knowledgeable, but I think it's useful to say a few words about what edutainment is. So in a very simple form, it could be a combination of education plus entertainment. So this is where behavior change messages are embedded within typically highly engaging media programming, and often it has the potential to be delivered at scale. And so you can think of sort of that might be a simple definition, but of course there's a more complex one. And there is sort of what you could think of as a continuum. So right on one side, we have very impact-driven mainstream development programming. On the other side, we have very mainstream entertainment-driven programming. And somewhere sort of in the middle, we have edutainment. And so I think one of the key things, at least for this evidence review, is that we're thinking of sort of in educational messages within a narrative programming content. So for example, just a documentary or just a radio talk show wouldn't be classified as edutainment because it really has to have this narrative component. So next slide. So in terms of the evidence review, I just have one slide on the methodology, and to go kind of quickly through what the parameters were. Like I said, we're talking about edutainment, so it could be media, creative art form, but it has to have this narrative component. And so this is sort of a wide range of different types of medium, but it really has to have this engaging storyline within it. In terms of the violence typologies that we looked for, so there was actually 4 different types of violence. The first was violence against women, and these were pretty broadly defined, but you can think of intimate partner violence, domestic violence within the home, you can think of sexual harassment on the street, and very kind of broad forms of violence against women. The second type was violence against children. And again, here taking kind of a wide net, it could be physical punishment or discipline within the home. It could be bullying in school. It could be violence that children experience from a stranger or someone who's known to them. The third type of violence was child early and forced marriage. And again, here trying to capture all the different dynamics around early and forced marriage. And then the last type of violence was female genital mutilation, or FGM. So we looked across those 4 types of violence broadly defined, and we were looking for studies that measured either attitudes, norms, or behaviors. And you can think attitudes are sort of what you think your personal beliefs are about violence. Norms are, of course, what you think others in your social circle think about violence. And then behaviors could be any act of either experiencing or perpetrating violence, depending on the type. And we limited sort of the scope of the review to low and middle income countries, and also rigorous quantitative impact evaluations. So these are typically experimental or quasi-experimental studies. They're usually sort of large scale studies. And of course, these often come with embedded qualitative studies or process evaluations. We sort of looked at those as supplementary, but not as the core studies included in the review. Next slide. So what did we find in terms of the amount of research out there? We found 21 studies and 25 papers covering all of these different types of violence, different types of edutainment. They were actually concentrated in the Africa region, so more than half of the studies were in sub-Saharan Africa, and you can sort of see this map here depicting the different countries. About 6 studies were in South Asia, and then across the other regions, there was just 1 study each. In terms of the types of edutainment, these were quite diverse, but most of them included some sort of video-based content, and then radio or audio content was the next highest number at 7, and then there was quite a variation of different types of either theater, social media, diverse types of other art forms. And I think one of the interesting and reasons why this area is so exciting right now is that all but one of the studies were released in the last 5 years. So it's really sort of an emerging area of really interesting research that, even 5 years ago, we wouldn't be able to say much about. Next slide. So to give you the headline findings first, and I know this is a busy graph, but let me sort of talk you through it. The headline findings, which are the top 2 bars, are that most studies show protective effects on at least one type of outcome that they measured. So in the top bar, you can see these are the studies that measured behaviors, and 64% of them showed protective effects. This is the turquoise part of the bar. When we look at attitudes and norms, we find that 71% of the studies showed some sort of protective effect. And so this is sort of an overall very sort of favorable and promising picture in terms of looking across all of the different studies at all of the different indicators. However, when we break that down by the type of violence, and these are the next sets of bars going down, you can see there's some variations. So for violence against women studies, this is where the bulk of the evidence was, but the protective effects are slightly lower than the average overall in the study. So we find 57% of the studies find protective effects on behaviors, so reducing violence against women, whereas 69% of the studies find shifts in terms of rejecting harmful attitudes and norms around violence against women. And then when you go further, you can see next are the child early and forced marriage studies. Here, these actually look very promising, but there's fewer studies. And then going towards FGM and child violence against children, we see there's much fewer studies, and these are very promising for child marriage, but just showing null effects for violence against children. And that's only one study that we found on violence against children. So that's obviously an area where we need much more evidence. So while this is looking very good sort of overall, I have to mention sort of two caveats. So the first caveat is that there were some studies that measured and adverse or mixed, let's say, both positive and negative effects on attitudes or behaviors. And the interesting thing here, you can see these are the red portions of the bars. The interesting thing is that actually all of these studies sort of attributed these to either changes in reporting, so participants were more understanding what constitutes violence, or more willing to disclose it, possibly because of shifts in attitudes or reductions in social stigma brought on by the intervention. So here, it's sort of a cautious note that we do see some adverse effects, but it's still unclear if these are sort of true adverse effects or if these are really being driven by these sort of intervention effects that are changing reporting. The second sort of caveat I want to mention is that a lot of these studies actually, showed variations in effects by different study arm. And so what I mean here is that while overall it might look like, okay, many of these studies and many of these interventions are really reducing these outcomes that we care about, a lot of the studies were sort of variable. So for example, they might show reductions in violence in one set of intervention packages, while in another, maybe the effects weren't significant. And I'll give you a few examples of this in the next few slides. So next slide. So here's a few examples just to give you an idea of what some of these studies actually looked like. And I wanted to highlight these not just because they have some variation in the different effects, but also because they use types of media that are sort of less explored. So one study in Vietnam done by Catherine Yount and colleagues targeted young men in universities. And they implemented a intervention called Global Consent, which was a 6-module interactive web-based training, which included a serial drama on sexual violence. The study was evaluated using a randomized control trial with follow-ups at 6 and 12 months. And the impacts they found were promising. So they showed reductions in odds of reporting sexually violent behavior among these young men, but they found no changes in attitudes, rejecting rape myths. So you see this sort of dual variation in effects. Some of the outcomes we care about are reducing, some of them there are no changes in. And they hypothesized that the changes in behaviors came from sort of a potentially a bystander effect or potentially knowledge that the men gained about the legal consequences of perpetrating sexual violence. And so we still see this reduction in the behaviors while not seeing a reduction in the attitudes. And then the second study I want to highlight is from South Africa. And here the study targeted young women of about the same age. And this was an intervention called Chatty Cuz, which was a WhatsApp behaviorally informed gamified chatbot, which included an audio drama narrative in one of the arms and also a direct link to trained counselors. This was also evaluated in an RCT with a 4-day follow-up and a 3-month follow-up. And here they also found reductions in experience of any intimate partner violence, but no significant changes in the audio narrative arm alone, whereas both arms actually reduced attitudes rejecting IPV. So here again, we see this variation in effect, where here there was really success in reducing attitudes rejecting IPV, but only reductions in experience in one of the study arms. Next slide. So one of the things that we did in the review was to sort of look at the different potential mechanisms that were contributing towards behavior change, which I think is, really interesting from a design point of view, but also important to understand how we sort of take content and shift it to new sort of settings and think about if it will work in a new target group or in a new context. And so we basically looked at 4 different mechanisms underlying behavior change. And the first is an information channel. So participants could gain knowledge, maybe about the negative effects of a certain kind of violence, for example, around FGM. They could also learn about laws or punishment for perpetrators. And so really learning about things that they didn't know about this type of violence through the edutainment. The second is an individual persuasion channel, and this is sort of the classic edutainment channel. So thinking of the characters as role models and viewers or participants being exposed to these new ways of thinking and behaving. The third is a norm diffusion channel. So edutainment could sort of socialize a new norm around violence that individuals believe, others in their social circles are taking up, and so sort of sanctions for going against the old norm, or sort of their adherence to this new norm is sort of changing after participating in the edutainment. And then finally is a service linkage channel. So participants could be encouraged to seek services, or the edutainment could promote participation in additional programming that could create these ripple effects towards behavior change. Next slide. And so this is a very busy sort of heat map, and I encourage you to go look at the paper if you're interested, but basically here what we try to do is list all of the different studies. So these are sort of ordered by the type of violence that they examine, with violence against women being at the top. And on the columns, you can see the different sort of impacts, first for behaviors, then the different mechanisms of change, so attitudes, norms, information, and service linkages. And where the bubbles are green, you can see that that particular mechanism was evidenced in the study. So in addition to the behavior change impacts that might have occurred, the study showed supporting evidence of these different mechanisms. And then the rest of the columns sort of show you which type of media the study was looking at, who the particular intervention was targeted towards, whether it's men and boys, women and girls, or if it had complementary programming, and then the length of the overall edutainment content. So I think the takeaway here is just broadly that there was evidence for all of these mechanisms, although the individual persuasion channel was the sort of the one that had the most evidence behind it. And again, some of these different components around the design of the edutainment. One of the things to note here is that many of the studies and many of the interventions had actually multiple types of media engaged. But nonetheless, most of the content was fairly short in terms of duration. So actually, most of the content was under 3 hours total. Next slide. So just to kind of draw out some practical lessons, even though you'll hear many more from the next few speakers. I think looking across all of these different studies, a few things sort of emerged. And the first is that maybe unsurprisingly, characters are really key. And so edutainment really, to be successful, needs to invest in these storylines with really compelling, memorable characters that really emotionally engage audiences and make them want to watch and make them think about the narratives. And of course, a way to do this would require really narratives to be grounded in local realities, led by local script readers and experts who know the context. Otherwise, these messages are not going to resonate sort of with the audience that you expect them to. The second is really around engagement. So obviously violence is a sort of unique topic. It's relational, whether it's between partners, whether it's between, caregivers and children, like child marriage or FGM. And so one of the things that came out from the studies is that you really have to craft narratives that will resonate and engage with multiple audiences, and importantly, including men and boys. The third is to try and create ripple effects. So a lot of the edutainment, you know, you can think of it as a standalone intervention, but really what you want it to do is to sort of create these ripple effects. And this could be through linking it to services, linking it to social change movements or other complementary programming that will really guide debates and keep things sort of moving beyond the core content. And then the last one is just ethics and evidence. So I think when we're thinking about both creating content and evaluating these sorts of intervention, there has to be really careful attention to ethics to avoid both re-traumatization and ensure the storylines are really evidence-based and avoid backlash. And this was something that we actually found to be lacking in a lot of the studies was sort of a narrative around, you know, how these different ethical aspects were addressed within the studies. Next slide. So this is, of course, I'm a researcher, so while this evidence base is really, I think, promising and more so than I even sort of expected when I started out looking through the literature, we have still a lot to learn. And here are just some of the things I think are at the forefront of the next evidence generation effort. So I think a lot of the studies were actually pretty short term. And so one question outstanding is how sort of intensive and sustained does content and messaging need to be to have really these lasting and long-term effects? So we see them in the short term, but can they be sustained? A second question is around what platforms and media sources are the most effective, and some studies are already testing this, but I think we need much more. The third is how do social norm networks and multiplier effects sustain or change impacts over time? Fourth, what complementary programming can boost impacts or help guide the narrative, and how should these be implemented? And then finally, I think edutainment and the interest in edutainment from the violence field has often been because there's potential to go to scale and sort of have these impacts in a pretty cost-effective manner if we're thinking about post-production costs. And yet we have really little evidence around how cost-effective these models are and sort of at different levels of scale. And so certainly future studies should be looking at cost-effectiveness in addition to just impacts. Next slide. So this is, I think, my last slide, and this is just to say that there is a practice sort of based brief in addition to the academic article that has some of these lessons drawn out, and you can find it on the Prevention Collaborative webpage and also through this QR code. So that's all from me, and I'll pass to Phinah now to take us through some of the exciting work that they're doing at Soul City. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber, and again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues who are joining us. My name is Phinah, Kodisang as indicated, and I'm just going to take you through one of the case studies that Soul City implemented, you know, to showcase how edutainment can work and show the results that Amber referenced. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. By way of introduction, we are an organization that has been in existence since 1992, you know, within a country that was going through transition. And what we knew then and what we know now is that media is a powerful tool that can either reinforce harmful norms or can dismantle them. And as an organization, we choose to use media for the latter, which is to dismantle systems of oppression, right? We were formerly known as a Soul City Institute for Health and Development Communication, and you would have seen those who have followed our journey as an organization, even the different logos that we've used as an organization to show that transition. And we cemented our rebranding in 2016 when we now moved to, you know, feminist principles and ideologies around the work that we do. And so we rebranded, and hence you see in our logo, you know, a young woman with her fist raised, because we believe that we stand for those whose voice needs to be amplified in communities. So the model we use is that of blending drama with data and also moving people from emotion to what evidence shows us. So we use different platforms, whether it's radio, print, community action, to shift, the different attitudes and behaviors. And we use storytelling to make sure that we advocate. Next slide. So you can see that we've been in the game for a long time, over 30 years of doing this work. Even though we formally registered in 95, the work itself started in 1992. So the model that we follow, is that of using research. Like I say, data then becomes what drives the outcome or the output of whatever that is produced, right? So we implement through different phases. And phase one usually is where we do the planning and the research part. There's nothing that we put out there that has not gone through rigorous research. Even when scripts are written, they are tested in the field with members of the audience. We are targeting, anything, whether it's print, whether it's radio, everything goes through a rigorous testing process. Formative tests and summative tests are conducted on each and every content that is developed, right? And that takes about 25% of the allocated budget and work to make sure that, in the different phases of the work, we are allocating the right resources. Then we get to phase two, which is where you do the actual development of the content, and you pilot it before it goes to production, which becomes your phase three. And then once you've done your production, it also goes through that rigorous testing, as well as, checking resonance, language, characters that you are using, as outlined in Amber's presentation, to make sure that you meet the requirements of edutainment, not just the entertainment piece, because the education component is equally important. Then once we've done all those tests, we then tick, the boxes of having met the requirement. We go into phase four, which is where we now implement the drama on TV or on radio, or on the booklets are then ready to be used in the communities. So keep this in mind in terms of the different phases, noting that at every stage you are testing, resonance, relevance, and ensuring that you are not using foreign concepts that will not resonate with the communities you are targeting. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a detailed description of the model that I explained within the ecosystem. So like I said, it goes through the different stages of research, right? Where you identify the topic, you develop the terms of reference, you do your literature review on the topic, you also do qualitative research, you do focus groups where you engage with, the target group and get what the issues are and what the gaps are in the knowledge that exists. Then you consult with different stakeholders, you develop a message brief around the issues, then you map the messages according to what you want to produce. And we will see as we go. Next slide, please. Okay, here we give a detailed breakdown of the different elements. Like I said, there's topic identification. You go through a co-creation workshop. You can never develop a message targeted at young people without involving young people. So you need to make sure that the audience that is targeted is represented in all the different phases. Even when you develop your theory of change, you need to ensure that it maps out the desired outcomes and the pathways that you will take in producing that message. Your literature review, like I said, looks at what is already in evidence, you know, how does it align with your theory of change? What are the issues that are coming up as new issues that you need to factor into your message brief? And again, we can never overestimate the fact that you must engage the target audience at all stages, even when you do your consultations. We can go to the next one. I think this was just to detail each step that you saw in the graph. All right. And just also to give you insights into how long some of these processes take, you know, the message design workshop, where you work with your researchers, you work with the different teams, the media team, you know, the implementers, material developers, everyone who's involved. You know, you sit in meetings over a 3-month process, but you break down the work into small components where at each stage you are building towards the end product, which is a story on TV that is able to shift norms, that is able to challenge behavior, that is able to also shift attitudes towards gender-based violence, violence against women, and violence against children, right? So your message brief becomes a document that should always find its way into the messages that you will be putting out, whether it's on TV, whether it's on radio, whether it's in a booklet. You never move away from your message brief because it anchors whatever education you want to bring to the communities, you know, looking at behavioral outcomes and some of the areas that you touched on, Amber, you know, whether it's IPV, whether it's alcohol misuse, teenage pregnancy, whatever the message is, you will make sure that, you know, the message brief anchors that content, even if it's now developed into, you know, a graphic or is developed into a drama story. It's anchored through that message brief. And then you work with the creative team, of course, to translate the message brief into storylines. And again, collaboration across, and then your story and script writing comes out of that and is also reviewed. Next slides, please. Okay. End-line evaluations, like I said, will also form a part of this. So because Amber spoke to the research component, I want to skip to the part where I show you a case study of what was developed following these processes that are mentioned in these previous slides. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so now we use an example, and you will see that even when you look at the video, you will see that this was some time ago, you know, over 10, 15 years ago that this was done, but the message still resonates even today, right? And next slide. The example we are showcasing here is what was produced in series 4 of Soul City. And the context in the country at the time was that there was a domestic violence act that government wanted to launch, and Soul City played a pivotal role in advocating for this act. And while the act was passed and government was struggling with how people will understand it and interpret and that it's enforced, you know, it required an assistant of a model like Soul City was using, which is the edutainment model, to drive the message home in a way that people will understand. So take complex, you know, phenomena and translate it into a story that, one, entertains people, but also educates them. So this is where then Soul City stepped in, and the Matlakala story was then born. And Matlakala is a story that to date still, you know, moves people because they were able to see domestic violence portrayed in a way that makes people want to take action. And in fact, in the series itself, there was a call to action that was put forward, right? So Matlakala was more than just a character. She became a mirror for many women who were actually going through domestic violence themselves. Her husband, Tamang, who was a teacher and a man of status in the community, also became a mirror through which men looked at themselves, or how society looked at men who, are people of stature in the community, but behind closed doors are abusers, and reconciling what they were seeing with what the action should be that they take. So we see in the story, and I'm narrating the story because we are not able to show the video. You'll be able to take the, I think we put in the link where you can go and watch the story afterwards, but at least now you will watch it with the understanding that I have given. So we see a turning point in this story where Matlakala now is beaten to the point of hospitalization, and she realizes when she sees another woman in hospital, that in fact women can die from being beaten by their husbands, and that we are introducing the protection order that you can go and get. And in her community, the father is also, supportive in mobilizing the community to take action. And actually, we end up seeing this action being taken. Next slide. This is, you can scan this to go and watch the story. So please do take the link and go and watch Matlakala's story, and do give us feedback once you've watched it in terms of what you felt, what you saw, and what you learned from watching it. Thank you. Next slide. These are some of the, it's a collage of what you see in the story with, how the storyline was unpacked, where the community is convening, the woman in the hospital, the father standing up and challenging the community, challenging the norms of inaction in the communities where Matlakala resided, and now seeing the community actually taking action with the pot beating in Matlakala's yard. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so there were enablers, sorry, go back. Oh yeah, so there were enablers in this story, and in the type of way Soul City approached the work. It was not just a TV drama that remained on TV. They mobilized also in the communities, right? So you see media mobilization being one pillar or one arm of the work, the partnership with different networks, where out of what was produced on TV and trying to get the Domestic Violence Act to be understood in communities, there was work that was done in terms of training, booklets, community events that were raising awareness around the Domestic Violence Act. There was advocacy as well that was done, and the advocacy was not just, to make the issues known, but was to also put pressure and to make sure that the campaign became, alive in communities, and that women were really seeing the benefit of the Domestic Violence Act, and they were actually going and accessing the services to get those protection orders and make sure that they are safe, right? And so the impact that we saw was that there was a 10% rejection in the domestic violence as a private matter, because remember, the narrative around domestic violence is usually that it's a private matter between partners, it must be resolved privately. And the narrative Soul City was pushing at the time was that it shouldn't be a private matter, and the law is there to ensure that women are protected. And there was a shift, 22%, plus minus 22% shift in social norms around gender-based violence. And so the story became a catalyst. It didn't just entertain, but it mobilized and made what was invisible visible in the eyes of the communities. hotlines were established. Women were calling those hotlines. Communities started organizing themselves. And I remember in one of the meetings we attended, someone from India actually spoke about how that helped them in India organize themselves, and they started organizations around, what they were seeing demonstrated by the Soul City drama. So that communicated that change is possible when stories are rooted in the truth, in reality. Communities are part of the process, and media is used not to numb, but to awaken communities to the realities. So the layering of the different components became an enabler in terms of how successful this Series 4 became. Next slide. We then, as an organization, as we were evolving ourselves, still using the Matlakala story, we then moved into having bold conversations. And in 2020, at the height of COVID, we then developed a talk show which spoke to the issues that were still, being faced by women in how the implementation or the challenges with the implementation of these laws that were advocated for, excuse me, were still being delayed and not even implemented effectively. So we then started a talk show called It's a Feminist Thing, still rooting the key issues of violence and it being something that must be changed, and how communities can be bold and unapologetic in taking action. And the talk show itself was inspired by what was happening in the country at the time. There was a movement called the Total Shutdown, where women, frustrated by the fact that the laws were not being implemented, took to the streets, in one voice across the country and shut the country down to really get government to listen, to say, look, we know we have all these laws and policies, but we are not tackling the systemic issues that make women remain subjugated and abused. And the laws are there, but they are not, doing what they should. So we layered the drama with a talk show, again showing, Soul City's capability to morph into a relevant mouthpiece, let me say, for communities that we serve, and using the very same voices of the communities to push their advocacy agenda. So It's a Feminist Thing was more an advocacy arm, where we were calling in experts in the space to say, why are we still not seeing these things move? From 1998 to 2020, why do we still have challenges? What is it that needs to be done? And we were using an intergenerational feminist lens to look at these issues, because you can imagine a generation of 1998, engaging with someone who's a teenager in 2020, but the issues still remaining and needing even more intervention. Next slide. Okay. Some of the principles, I think, for us that we saw when we were doing both the Matlakala story and It's a Feminist Thing, is that production needs to be anchored in feminist principles, right? We need to make sure that we understand the storyline. And I saw in the comment the ecological model being referenced. At the center is a woman, but this woman exists in a relationship, in a family, in relational, a relational layer, and you cannot then do anything with this individual without also addressing what is happening in their relational layer, which is where the family, the boyfriends, husband, girlfriends exist. So you need to also do some work at that level. But these relations don't exist outside of societal norms that exist. So if society has normalized violence, those relationships will be done or will go through that lens of it's okay to beat a woman, it's okay to rape, because nobody takes anyone, to account when that happens. So that layer of community is also important for you to work with, which we saw in the Matlakala story. But all of these are held by policies and frameworks in the South African context that guarantees women their safety and freedom from these abuse. Hence, that ecological model then becomes the feminist framing through which the work is done. So it becomes an activism on its own, where we don't just inform, but we agitate, we provoke, we mobilize, and we get society to start having conversations that they would not normally have. And we move from silence to solidarity. If you saw in the Matlakala story, the father got the community to move from just keeping quiet when they hear the screams to actually start going out and banging the pots, to bring attention to the fact that this is not acceptable and it will not be accepted. So we are telling everyone, and even the ones watching the stories on TV, to say your story matters. If you see yourself in Matlakala, there is help out there, and that is why it's always done with mobilizing other stakeholders, where there'll be a lifeline, a helpline that is provided so that communities know where to go if they want to take action. Next slide, please. So I just want to play this clip quickly for you. And this was our latest production. It's a PSA 1 minute, where we were showing some of the ways that we need to challenge in action. I hope it plays. Please play the clip. Thank you. I couldn't hear the sound, but basically what that clip is talking about, or is narrating, is that there's a couple who's sitting in their sitting room. They can hear the noise of a woman screaming, being beaten by her husband. And there's, on the other side, noise coming from someone having a party. But they chose to respond to the noise coming from the flat where there was a party, and they called the police to say, we can't sleep, these people are making noise. But they were ignoring the noise they were hearing from a woman being beaten up in her home, and we were simply saying, if you are not reporting, even when you can hear, you are part of the problem, basically. Again, a call to action and showing where people can call and the numbers they can get help from. So next slide. Okay, we now have an opportunity again as Soul City to do drama, and this time doing drama with the younger age group, the 14 to 17, looking at IPV within these relationships, and following that model that we spoke about. We are in the process of creating another drama series that will tackle issues of coercion, digital violence, peer pressure, and gendered power dynamics, right? What is different here is that we are now addressing the younger age group. With Matlakala, we were addressing a married couple, both of them independent, working, and communities accepting that because it's a married couple, we can't interfere until they were, you know, convinced that they need to interfere. Now with this age group, which lives on social media and is influenced by social media, it will be interesting to see what this drama is able to shift in the age group. And once the results are out, we will be able to come hopefully to platforms like this and give you feedback in terms of whether or not, even with the age group, you know, with this younger age group, we are able to change the norms, to influence the behaviors. Next slide. Yeah, that is it from us. We really have been in the field, and we note that the evolution doesn't change the storyline. You know, at the end of everything, we need to educate while we entertain, and that is what edutainment is about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh,
And
I'll
now
hand over
Alex.
to Alex. Sorry.
Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm very happy to be here and to share some of the work that we're doing with RAES with you. As a matter of fact, at RAES we are the nearly newcomers. If you compare us to Soul City, 25 years ago, I was lucky enough to be a student of Miguel Sabido, Estade Fossard, and others who are pioneers of the field. But already 25 years ago, I was a big fan of Soul City, where the team was my heroes, and I'm really glad to be presenting on the same day that you guys. I'm still like impressed by your work. It's really cool, and it's inspired me to create in 2005 this organization RAES in Senegal with colleagues who were researchers, journalists, scholars, and artists from the US and Africa. And the idea behind this was to open an organization, start an organization, an NGO, who would import in French speaking Africa, mostly in West Africa, even though now we've spread in other countries, these strategies, these methods, edutainment, but other strategy methods from the communication for development or communication for social change world. And so far, the idea was not to reinvent the wheel, but to use all these good works that you had done and you're still doing. There's less, a few dozens of organizations who are doing this great work around the world, but to import these strategies and experiment. We've been lucky enough to get funders who help us over the last 20 years to experiment and to try new things. And this is what we've been doing so far. And today I'd like to share with you an example of that work. It's C'est la vie. So we can move on to the next slide, maybe. C'est la vie is a program that we started in 2013. Basically, it's a TV show, edutainment TV show, and it became years after years, and mostly around 2015, 2016, 17, a model. We used all the good lessons learned from other organizations to create our own intervention models, what we call our 360 degrees approach. I'll try to share with you today. And we got some of the results that I'm sharing with you now, and I'll do my best in 15 minutes to tell you how we got there and the few lessons we've learned in order to achieve that. Some examples. I'm not going to play the clip because the clip is in French and there is no sound whatsoever. But I think that all of you will have access to the link and be able to watch it or to watch other episodes of C'est la vie. Some of them are available in 6 languages, English too. But some of the examples of what we've learned and how we refine this model since 2013 is that we move from education to entertainment. What I mean by that is that we were really focused on messaging, and we really were focused on using all the formative research and the communication skills to craft scientifically accurate and culturally appropriated messages and to test them and to refine this approach. But now I think we are confidently becoming more and more entertaining for two reasons, mainly. Because first of all, the media landscape, as you have all noticed, have dramatically changed, and we are not competing against few TV shows on one or two local public stations. There are like countless ways to have access to content, and we are constantly struggling and competing against other contents. So we need to catch the attention of the public. We need to be entertaining, and so this is why we're partnering with strong talents, the best artists, if we can, the best actors or directors, and that to create like a really cool content. But the second reason also is that, as Amber shared with us, the better the stories, the better the character, the better all of this is craft, the most impact we will have on the suspension of disbelief of our audience. And most of our studies, the studies that we conducted with our research partners from UCLA, Drexel, the University of Dakar, show that the more there is a suspension of disbelief, the more likely you will have people to change attitudes and behavior. It's easy to increase knowledge. It's more difficult to get this shift in attitude and even more to boost action. But suspension of disbelief here is key. We have also moved from formative research to a deeper understanding of culture and public needs. What I mean by that is that after some times, like 3-4 years ago after COVID, we found out that those formative research processes were always the same, and they were quite dry, and they not deep enough or not usable enough for our writers, skillful writers, to create the strong stories and the strong characters we need. So we have increased intervention with anthropologists. We're exploring the local cosmogonies, the local pop cultures, how figures of heroes and villains are evolving from one culture to another, the takeaway lessons of folky tales, for instance. These are all elements that we are including now in the entertaining part, but also the educational part of our content. Other lessons that we learn, we move from communication change to research on how we can use communication to impact or to measure the impact. And more and more, our edutainment programs now are research-led programs with our researcher partners. And we are using those several contents that we're creating, using different medias, techniques, communication techniques, to carry the same message to a given audience. And we measure more and more the impact of this and trying to understand why it is working more with an influencer this time, or with a role model another time, on TikTok or on Facebook or on TV or on radio. So this is the knowledge that we have been collecting for the 3 or 4 last years, and that we are now using more and more in our programs. And finally, we are moving from regional to local. We had to fundraise so many funds to start our first projects with C'est la vie 10 years ago, that we needed to create programs in French, for instance, to resonate all across a region, like Saharan region or the Sahelian region. But now we are able to craft more and more local stories, local characters, in order to be more and more relevant to our audience. So I'm going to guide you through this quickly. Can we move to the next stage? Next slide, please. So this is C'est la vie, some information about the narrative infrastructures of C'est la vie. I think that one of the reasons this has been a success story so far is because we have focused on the diffusion of the program. And I don't know, like 8 or 9 years ago, we had like over 20 million people who had watched already one episode. We cannot count so far, We have been dubbing the show in many languages. We are broadcasting it, or at least measuring this in 9 countries, but it goes now. It's broadcasters in I would not know how to answer that. We have strong groups or pages on the social medias. As a matter of fact, in the French-speaking Africa, we are the #1 health provider of information provider, and with like a large group of followers. We also have a website, a digital library with lots of content, and an app that helps young adults to have access to services. And we'll see that we are increasing more and more our messaging to boost action. What I mean by boosting action is to make sure that people will know what to do and where to do or what to do in order to solve the issues, and we are measuring this. So yeah, because most of the time, one of the real weakness of edutainment, it costs a lot of money if it doesn't reach too many people, but it's very cost efficient if we reach millions of people. And that's what we are doing, or at least trying to do with most of our program, make sure that we are going to market there as much as possible, so that as much as people as possible will have access to them. Next slide, please. So for C'est la vie, I'm not going to go through this because this is very similar to what Amber explained and to the Soul Cities model. It's very basic. It's a 360 approach. It's how we build edutainment campaigns. I want to say here that we moved to a wide transmedia approach that wasn't really well contained, where we were producing like TV contents, radio contents, organizing debate on mass media, opening like a huge access to discussion on the digital and community spheres, where we were like boosting advocacy issues, like doing all this work, but it was not very well articulated, mostly because the fundings were not coming at the right time. To something that is more articulated, we are using campaigns format with beginning, middle, and end to set precise objectives, measure them with precise goals, and with a beginning and an end, which really helps us to measure success and impact, and also, of course, limitations. Slide, please. So for C'est la vie, over the last few years, we've been producing like 117 episodes of 26 minutes. They deal with various range of issues, from maternal and child health to sexual and reproductive health to violence, of course, gender violence, to gender issues. We have also shows on the radio, and we're opening space both on TV and radios for discussions, for people to call in, or for a debate that we're organizing with our local TV and radio partners. We have also an educational kits that we are using online, but mostly in the communities of the partnering countries that where we are working with a network of a few dozens of local organizations that we are training to use these kits. We have, thanks to grant from the Gates Foundation 3 years ago, we have been boosting our activities online. We are creating contents online. We are experimenting new formats and developing all kinds of content that we are evaluating or measuring are impacting not only knowledge of our audience, but also, and that's really new, that are really changing attitudes and behavior towards key and difficult issues. And this is encouraging us to increase this presence online, because it is cheaper, and because it is easier to measure, and because we are confidently able to share with you that it is really working and impacting our audience. Next slide, please. Right now, we are moving with IFPRI on using all these strategies. We've been using these strategies on various issues such as environment, citizenship, sports and development, gender issues. And now we're using this for domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. We've produced earlier this year a movie using a new format, 1 hour and 30-minute movie that we are right now editing. That was supposed to be available in cinemas across the region in French, but also on television stations. We're hoping to make a sale to also platforms such as Netflix and others. Also to get this content available for our local partners in Senegal, so the SEOs that we are working with. And really the idea is to use this new format to engage our audience, mostly young male audience, to brainstorm, to reflect on these issues of domestic violence. As a matter of fact, we are now with Wellspring developing a program to test this on a very large scale. I think we're in 120 different communities to really be able to measure the impact on the knowledge, attitude, and belief and behaviors of our public. Next slide, because I think we are running out of time. So these are some pics of the movie. Okay, we're really looking on this is very local. It's made in Wolof. It's really based on the formative research that I described earlier in the presentation that really was done in the 2 regions that we are focusing on. So we think that the movie has a high, very high, we're hoping at least, entertainment value in order to really mobilize a large public, but its educational content is really targeted to a precise audience in a precise part of Senegal, in a precise language, and a precise culture. So we'll see how this works. I'd be happy to share that with you in several months. Next slide. I'd just like to introduce you to where we're moving on now. We're moving to new, with a grant from ULET, we are creating these Oasis centers. The idea is really to brainstorm on where we're going with entertainment, edutainment, I mean, where we're going. And we think, slide please, we think that we are moving to the narrative change field. That's the next step of our work, is going to create content that will help changing narratives. Why? It's because narratives, these are the ideas, as I wrote, a collection of stories about how the world works, and they shape our realities on 3 different levels: the personal level, our culture, and also the structural level, so the level of the laws and how our society is organized. We believe with a new group of searchers we're working with that edutainment, when it's well crafted, can help changing narratives and replacing all narratives that can be negative on the topic that we are carrying or treating or communicating on, replacing them by positive narratives. And this is the work that needs lots of research. And next slide, I'm going to show you some of the that's the last slide that I want to share with you. Voila, this is a work that really rely on formative research, as I say again, and that we were looking at the audience preferences, trying to understand way more how social norms are working, how myth and religion and whatsoever stories, folk stories are inspiring and shaping the belief of our audiences. And we are looking at how to create competing stories or stories that rely on that in order to communicate in a culturally appropriated way. And we're looking at being as local as we can be. We're experiencing way more different formats, films, as I said, docudramas, web series, where we just finished producing a TikTok series made of episodes of 50 seconds. So we're really looking in all kinds of directions for all kinds of publics. We are looking at new ways to monitor and evaluate, faster, less expensive, in order to get data in the middle of a program that can help us to shape its content better, and not evaluation that we were going to receive like 2 or 3 years later when it's too late to change anything. We are training a lot of our partners to improve the quality of the content we are producing, and in order to reduce sometimes excessive cost of production, because once again, we're competing against professionals of entertainment, and we need to be to produce the best quality in order to be in a position to compete against them more and more in a world where everyone can have access to any kind of content. And last but not least, we are strengthening partnership in order to maximize, to strengthen the narrative infrastructures. We cannot do this work alone, obviously. We need to work with politicians, we need to work with scholars, with influencers and celebrities to make sure that the best, as I say, the most talented artists will be working with us. We are mapping and networking with all kinds of services in order to make sure that the people that are that we communicating with and that we give knowledge to know what to do, know where to seek help, to find services, because most of the time we know that we can boost demand. But if the offer is not there, or if the demand doesn't know where to find the offer, well, this is sometimes not productive at all. It can be the opposite. So voila, I think this is more or less what I wanted to share with you, and I'm very happy to answer now questions.
Thank you so much to Amber, to Phinah, and to Alex for all of this really, really rich information. The chat has been very active as well. We have about 10 minutes, a little bit more than 10 minutes for questions. And we have answered, our speakers have answered a few questions in the Q&A already, although we may come back to some of those. There were a couple of clarifying questions, but I wanted to highlight one, and this is a question to you, Amber, because I think it's helpful for those not necessarily working in this field or thinking about working in this field to understand a little bit about how we kind of learn and evaluate some of these programs. So there's a question from Marcel, who asks, what would lead participants among whom the effect is measured in these studies to be actually exposed to the edutainment intervention whose effectiveness we're measuring? Asking the question because there's an assumption that constitutes a bias in itself, the people who are kind of ready to see this program. So I know this is kind of a research conundrum. So Amber, if you want to briefly mention that.
Yeah, this is a good question. And so I saw another question in the chat about what types of studies these were. And so let me just say that actually most of these studies were randomized control trials. 16 of them were. 3 of them were quasi-experimental studies, and 2 of them had both experimental and quasi-experimental methods. And the reason I mention this is because typically in a study what we do is we take a set of participants, and in this sort of edutainment study maybe we'd have sort of 2 different groups. For example, in a study that we did in Senegal, we had film clubs. So we set up these film clubs, and then one set of film clubs, they were watching this content C'est la vie, which is the edutainment content that Alex was talking about. And then in the other set of film clubs, we had a placebo film set of films. And so basically, both of the groups were sort of the bias around whether you would participate, whether you were interested in content, whether you had time, etc., to be part of these sort of film clubs is netted out. And so we're comparing really like, and we're able to really drill down on the impact. Now, in other sorts of settings where you want to have maybe more like a natural experiment, these are the quasi-experimental studies. So for example, you could extend radio coverage to a certain area and not to another, and then in that way look at the difference. And so I think there's a variety of different techniques, but we try as much as possible to be able to net out some of those biases around like participation, for example, or preference for a different topic or another. Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. there's lots of questions, so we probably won't get to all of them, but here are a couple. There was a question about, or maybe combining a couple of questions. So a question to Phinah about the decision for Soul City to move to different formats, how much this is linked to resource considerations. So, you know, the cost of a TV drama versus the cost of a talk show versus the kind of objectives that you have. And similarly, I think also from Becky, a question asking about the challenge of reaching audiences in an increasingly competitive media environment, and maybe these things are linked. So how have you adapted some of your approaches, formative research, other things to provide more insight to kind of stay ahead of the game, I think is the question. So maybe Phinah and then Alex, if you have to add.
Yeah, thanks. Most of it is based on funding. If it were up to us, we would have TV every year, but we don't have those resources. It takes a lot to produce drama, you know. And at the time we did the talk show, one, we were constrained by, we were planning to do drama, but COVID really impacted, you know, in terms of when we could do production, which is longer for drama than it is for a talk show. So we had to make decisions in that way, but also understanding that with a talk show, you also reach a different audience from the audience you reach with a drama series, you know. So it was also trying to balance it and making sure that each format that you produce for TV still gets the message across.
If I may add, I totally agree with that. It's sometimes very expensive to produce good drama. It's not expensive to produce drama, but it's very expensive to produce good drama, and we cannot rely anymore on funding for that. I think being partners of social impact funds or really developing our shows as if they were professional, and they are professional crafted shows in order to get semi or partly funded by the industry, by the entertainment industry, is one way to produce more or more shows like that. And this is really the direction we are looking at. We're saying, okay, partners are maybe sometimes reluctant to fund $300,000 for a show. But if they know that there is at least 40–50% of that funds that are coming from the economy of the industry of entertainment already, and that they can really use this opportunity to carry a message across millions of viewers or listeners or people online, well, this is easier to convince them, and because I will finish with that. It is essential to produce as much as we can, because otherwise we are flooded by the other kinds of content. So in order to keep repeating the message on the media, we need to produce over and over and over again. And sometimes, and it's true that sometimes funders have hard time to understand that, even more in this context.
Thank you. I have a question from the audience that comes to all of you. Amber had raised the issue of kind of ethical considerations and reflection, and we wanted to hear more about how to sort of design programming or how to address backlash if it's come up. Any specific techniques or approaches, anything that you can share from your experience. And please, folks, also in the chat, if you have experiences to share, we'd love to hear those as well. I think, as Amber said, it's something that isn't discussed very much in kind of evaluation papers or things that you read about programs, but is obviously an experience that people are dealing with as they develop and implement these.
Maybe I'll just say quickly before passing it, because I think the interesting bits are more on the production side. I think there's obviously a well-established protocols for addressing violence within research, but we see even, the studies in this area didn't seem to report on it to the extent that they should. So it could be a reporting issue, or it could be that also, these large-scale studies aren't the ones that will pick up these issues. Maybe it's the formative work, maybe it's the process evaluation work that will hone in on maybe the more kind of smaller segments of the participants that might have had challenges. So I just think we need more acknowledgement of this in the research, but of course it starts with the production. So maybe I'll pass it to the other panelists.
You want to say something, Phinah? No? I mean, many research tends to conclude that change occurs when issues are discussed, and backlash can be a problem. It's correct. I don't know who said that. It's Jenny Lee. Yeah, backlash can be a problem if we feel them. But it also can be an opportunity, because what we've been doing, all of us, is to create debate. So backlash can be an opportunity to open space for discussion, and this is what we really are looking for. So we have to come up with strong arguments, to sharpen them, and not be shy to jump in the arena, I think.
Phinah, anything to add? Or actually, we are about to end, so I'll just pass it also to you for any last words. It could be addressing that or anything else.
Yes, I have a hard
short
stop
time.
right now
Yes.
because I have to be in a meeting. I think everything that has been said, I agree with. That is why you engage in a rigorous process of, engaging with the community, with the audience, testing, the message, whether, you are using foul language that will not be acceptable, and you are able then to go back before you put the final product on TV. You would have removed some of the issues already, pre-production, and by the time you do production, you've engaged, and your advocacy also is how you can also address backlash, because you can't avoid some of these issues. Then they become your advocacy agenda throughout.
Thank you so much. And in an attempt to end on time, I just want to thank all of our panelists. It's been a really active also discussion here. I see. Please stay connected with us. You have here websites, social media of all three groups. And we will be sharing the recording, as well as we see a lot of really exciting resources shared in the chat, both from the organizations of our speakers, but also from many others. So we'll be sharing those out to everyone. And please do get in touch with us with any kind of questions or follow-ups. It looks like this is really a topic where there's a lot of interest, and that's very exciting to see. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you especially to our panelists today for sharing their experience, and also their colleagues who have been sharing resources in the chat as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see
Bye-bye.
you soon.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.